this schedule really shapes up for a playoff run with a 12-team playoff.
Areas that, you need to get from experience, which is just, hey, I need to make quicker decisions.
How do you define success for this team?
National championship.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here of the Cover 3 College Ball Podcast. And today, it's another one of our summer school episodes. We try to hit as many D1 teams as we possibly can over the summer. Today, it's Michael Bruntz, Husker 247. What's going on, dude?
Not much. How you doing?
Doing well, man. Welcome to the show, and excited to talk a little Nebraska football.
Pleasure to be here. It's always a good sign of the season. It's almost summer officially here.
Exactly. So Nebraska, 7 wins last year. Now they bring in Dana Holgorsen to run the offense. What's the vibe around Nebraska right now?
Yeah, I think there's quiet confidence right now with Nebraska. I mean, you've kind of got the Matt Rule year 3 bump that has kind of become a parenthetical around everything that they're doing this year is what he's done historically in year 3. They've also reset the deck a lot. I mean, you mentioned Dana Holgorsen. Offensively, I think there's a lot of good feelings about what this offense can be. You got a little bit of a taste of it last year in the last 4 games with kind of a taste, I guess, of Dana Holgorsen running the offense. Things are going to look a little bit different, but I think they kind of found something towards the end of the year. And certainly the transfer portal additions that they made in the offseason were, I think, more beneficial on the offensive side of the ball. With wide receiver, they brought in a couple impact guys that are going to probably start right away. They returned a couple guys at running back and also at wide receiver that they feel good about. And I think they upgraded the offensive line too with a couple impact guys. So I think on that side of the ball with Dana Holgorsen, I think there's a lot of good feelings right now in kind of the direction of things. And oh, by the way, you've got Dylan Raiola returning for his sophomore season. And I think there's confidence over there that he can kind of make that next step in his progression as a top level quarterback.
So they certainly feel like this offense is ready to take off. Dana has historically gone a little more up tempo. What are the big stylistic changes that we'll see with this offense this year?
Yeah, I think, towards what we saw at the end of last season was a little bit more of, we're making this change in November. We don't want to upset the apple cart too much. We'll kind of roll with what's there. I mean, I think you might see a little bit more tempo. I think they have the ability to go fast. And I think that's just the benefit of having a quarterback that's kind of been around the system a little bit and has been through a year of college football. At least Nebraska fans, you think of Dana Holgorsen and you immediately start thinking air raid and, what he did at Oklahoma State when Nebraska had to face him. But I think it's going to be a little bit more tailored to kind of what they feel like they have to do to win in the Big Ten. I mean, they are going to try to run the ball a lot. And you look at the additions that they made in the offseason up front, I think that was kind of the reason that they did that was they wanted to be able to, more easily win close games. But I think the name of the game for Nebraska offensively with Dana Holgorsen is going to be, can they be more efficient? And also, can they find explosive plays? And that was the biggest problem for them a year ago. And even after Dana was there, they found a little bit more explosive offense. But, how do you get 4-play drives and big plays rather than having to grind out 10, 12-play drives that are, a little bit more fraught with danger there? So I know that in the spring, at least, that was a big emphasis for this offense was how do you get the ball to your playmakers? How do you get bigger plays and how do you kind of get, a little bit more firepower offensively? So I expect to see a little bit more of that. I think tempo is part of that, certainly. But I do think, Nebraska is going to have to do more of finding those big plays that have really been lacking in the first 2 years of Matt Rule's tenure here.
Where do they want to see Dylan improve the most?
Well, I think a big piece of it is that they want him to be able to make plays with his feet. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of read option stuff or anything like that, but if you need to go out and pick up 3rd and 5 on a scramble or something like that, I think they want to see more willingness of him to do that. You saw it a little bit towards the end of last season, but during the offseason, they really focused on him kind of keeping his weight down a little bit more, working on quickness. He's a good athlete, but I think they just want to see a little bit more aggressiveness with him when he's got to go pick up the first down himself. The other piece of it that I think they want to see more improvement of, and I think there were opportunities last year that were maybe missed a little bit, is how do you hit on more of those deep balls? I think that was one thing that they felt like was going to be in the offense a little bit more going into last season. I think part of it was Dillon maybe not hitting those throws. Part of it was the wide receivers just weren't winning one-on-one enough outside. And I think those two pieces of it are where you need to see a little bit more in year two. I mean, I think we've seen more leadership from him this spring. I mean, I'm sure everybody feels that way about their quarterback this time of year, but he doesn't feel like a freshman anymore. Like, he feels like a veteran. It feels much more like his team and his offense. And even, when he's in front of the media, you just see a lot more of a comfort in him this spring and going into the summer than what you saw at the end of last season. So I think that was a big step of, this is his team. I mean, he's the 5-star quarterback that everybody expects a ton out of. And I think he's really taken a lot of that on himself to kind of be that guy for the offense.
So if there's a receiver one for this team who really emerges, like a guy who, has the potential to get like more than half the target share and score double-digit touchdowns, who's most likely to be that guy?
Dane Key, the Kentucky transfer. I mean, they needed to go into the portal and get a wide receiver one, a big body outside threat that had some production, and that's what they went and found. I mean, there were certainly connections with his wide receiver coach coming from Kentucky, but he was a guy that Nebraska really zeroed in on right away of, the mix of production and that veteran presence that they really needed in that group. They also got an Isaiah Hunter out of Cal. He had a really productive redshirt freshman year out there too. I think he's probably your other starter on the other side. And in terms of guys that are coming back, because they did add those guys out of the portal, but I mean, Ja'Cory Barney had a great freshman year. They kind of moved him around in formations. They used him as a runner. They threw to him a lot. I think he had over 50 catches last season as a true freshman. And I think he's a guy that's kind of poised for a little bit more of a bigger year, even just because I think they're going to find more opportunities for him downfield than what they did last year. And I think Dana Holgorsen kind of sees him as like a Tank Dell type comp from his time at Houston that he really wants to kind of use all over the place in that offense. So I do think they've upgraded at wide receiver from what they were a year ago. And I think that's one reason why there's at least some confidence over there that offense can take a big step forward in 2025.
You mentioned that they like the pieces they got on the offensive line. Is there a back who stands out to you that is just going to be the dude this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna be Emmett Johnson. He's going to be the front of that group. They lost Dante Dowdell to the transfer portal. And, he was kind of the bigger back that they paired with either Emmett Johnson or Ramir Johnson or whomever last year. But, I think what Dana Holgorsen really likes about Emmett Johnson is his ability as a pass catcher out of the backfield, which is a big part of Dana Holgorsen's offenses. You look at Emmett Johnson's production from, pre-Dana Holgorsen and post-Dana Holgorsen, it's two completely different seasons in terms of how they used him. So, I think he's going to be the front of that. Depth behind him is going to be kind of interesting. They've got Quentin Ives, who is kind of that bigger back that they've liked, but he really hasn't been counted on yet. So it's going to have to be Emmett Johnson to start the year, and I think they're going to have to use him in different ways and kind of build up the depth behind him. There's a number of younger guys that they like. Mekhi Nelson was a redshirt last year that I think is probably going to factor in that mix. Jarian Parker, who's a recruiting win out of St. Louis, is another guy that might factor there too. But right now, I mean, it's Emmett Johnson, and there's really not a co-number one right now as far as that depth chart goes.
All right, I feel like there's a lot to like about this Nebraska offense. On the flip side, after this break, we'll talk a little Husker defense.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
And we're back here on the Cover 3 College Ball Podcast, talking Nebraska football. Husker 247 expert Mike Bruntz. So let's talk here. Tony White leaves for Florida State. John Butler takes over. You lose like a ton in the front seven. How is this going to look different? And if possible, can you parse out that it's going to look different because of personnel or because of scheme or both?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more so personnel. I mean, I think the biggest departures from Nebraska last year were losing Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker from the middle of that defensive line. I mean, maybe he didn't get the accolades at the conference level that he probably deserves. Speaking of Ty Robinson, but he was really disruptive, not only as a pass rusher, but just a guy that, was a constant focus for opposing offenses, having a double team, having to always worry about where he is. And, for Nebraska, they've kind of got they've got a nice group of younger defensive linemen that I think they like, but it's a lot of guys that haven't had to step up and really be counted in a big way. Riley Van Poppel, who redshirted last year, is going to be kind of counted on in the middle of that defense to step in for Robinson and Huntmaker. They got Williams Winery out of the transfer portal from Missouri, former 5-star defensive end. He's also going to be a guy that's going to have to step in there. Keona Davis, who's a sophomore that played a little bit last year, but kind of an arrow up type guy for him. So there's a lot of question mark there. Certainly the scheme is going to be a little bit different. They're going to kind of do things similarly in some ways that they did under Tony White, but I think you're going to see a little bit more aggression. I think they're going to try to force the issue a little bit more on third down. That was one thing that Nebraska kind of struggled with over the last couple of years, was just getting off the field on third down. I mean, they would give up a few first downs and then get off the field, but that's one area that they really want to improve on. So the defensive front, I think that's the biggest question mark probably on the whole roster right now, is just how do you replace those two guys that were so valuable for so long to your program?
Do you think they're okay without Butler and James Williams?
Yeah, James Williams kind of became the third down guy at times. I mean, he was never a full, a 3-down type defender, and I think that was probably the one knock on him. Certainly Butler had played a lot of snaps for Nebraska, and that was a big loss too. I do think they've kind of got guys and pieces that are, good pass rushers on their own. I mean, Willis McGahee the fourth. You look back at what he did last year as a true freshman, his best games were against Nebraska's best competition. And I think they're going to count on him quite a bit to step in and be, that pass rusher from the jack spot. They went out and got Deshaun McCullough from Oklahoma, a guy that I think they're going to move around and use in a bunch of different spots. So those two were certainly losses as veteran guys that they put a lot of development into. But I think they, kind of saw that finding that ready-made pass rush is something they needed to get out of the portal. And they've got a young group of linebackers that I think they feel can be difference makers. I think Vincent Shavers is probably one guy on your lineup card you want to circle. He had a really strong freshman campaign out of Miami, was a long-time Miami commitment, and flipped to Nebraska right before National Signing Day. He's kind of that attitude guy that you need in the middle of a defense. And I think he can maybe be a little bit more of a pass rusher from that inside linebacker spot than maybe what they had a year ago.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. With Rule being a guy that I think is well known in the industry for like taking guys with good traits who are maybe kind of raw and developing them. So we think Van Poppel and Shavers are kind of two of those guys with real upside if they hit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly, Van Poppel played as a true freshman. They made kind of a tough decision to redshirt him last year. I mean, they could have used him, I think, at times. And he played the 4 games, really worked on his body. And I think he was kind of always that next guy up that they had in mind in the middle of that defense. And you go back to that bowl game against Boston College, Vincent Shavers was all over the place, played with a ton of attitude. He's going to be the guy in the middle for him this year. They added Marquise Watson Trent, from Georgia Southern, the reigning Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year, three straight years of 100 tackles. So they added some production and kind of a veteran presence next to a guy like Shavers that they're really kind of high on and what his long-term potential can be. So the front seven, they're going to need some guys to step up early on. They're going to lean on some of those veterans and hope that some of the younger guys are ready to go too. But that, especially the linebacker spot, I think in 2 years under Matt Rule, Nebraska has been able to develop some guys, walk-ons that turn into starters, guys that were maybe overlooked a little bit in the past. And I think they feel like they can develop the depth that way as well at that spot.
And looking at this, I mean, there's a world in which Nebraska is favored in 11 games.
Mm-hmm.
If they kind of, I don't know, like just hearing you talk, looking at my notes and looking at their historical averages and with the rule 3-year jump, if they kind of play at the top of their range, they're probably only underdogs at Penn State. And every home game is very winnable. Even if you were a home dog, they're not going to be like, as long as Raiola stays healthy, like they're not going to be more than a touchdown dog at home to anybody. I don't think. They dodge Oregon, they dodge Ohio State. I think you'd like to see Purdue on the schedule, but you do get Northwestern. I mean, this seems like a gift, honestly.
Yeah, it breaks well for them. You've got Michigan in Lincoln. You've got USC in Lincoln. Like you said, finally miss Ohio State, which felt like that was almost like an annual game. So yeah, I mean, there's the potential for that jump. I mean, there's a pathway there. I mean, as you're well aware, I mean, Nebraska's before Matt Rule. I mean, it's not just on his tab, but this is a program that has not won close games and has been terrible at it, and self-inflicted type mistakes in those games. And, I think the goal has been, and you look at the changes they made on special teams, which we haven't really talked about yet, which was a big focus this offseason, is how do you play towards the top of that potential? And I think that's kind of been the question mark for years around Nebraska is, things look like they should be trending in a positive direction there, but for whatever reason, you're not able to get off the ground. So, it feels like a year where, Nebraska could be a bit of a darling. I know a lot of the win total numbers are 7.5, and it feels like there's pretty good potential for Nebraska to get over that. They finished the last season with momentum. I think they made some positive additions in the transfer portal. It's just a matter of when you get to the fall on Saturdays, can you put all that stuff together?
100%. On the flip side, if they don't play to kind of the top of their maybe projectable range, a lot of these games are losable. Like you're favored against Cincinnati, but not by 20. I mean, at Maryland is not the hardest place to play, but like if they somehow are better than I think, at Minnesota won't be easy. I mean, not almost ever. UCLA kept playing hard for Deshaun last year. Iowa, of course, never an easy out. Getting Lincoln's a little bit better, getting them obviously there on the road. But I usually don't talk special teams on this, but because you brought it up, and they were really bad last year on special teams. What are the changes they made, and how do we expect them to work out?
Yeah, so Nebraska last year, between extra points, field goals, and punts, had 10 kicks blocked, which is just, I mean, saw all 10 of them. So they were there. But, they made a change at special teams coordinator. Longtime Matt Rule, special teams coordinator Ed Foley had been in that job. They went a different direction, and now Mike Eckler, long ago Nebraska assistant, but had been at Tennessee as their special teams coordinator, is in Lincoln now. His sole focus is special teams and getting that going in the right direction. And when we have that conversation about close losses, I mean, special teams is such a big piece of that, and just trying to find consistency there. In addition to Eckler, they're going to go a different direction. They're going to go to more of the rugby style punting, which they hadn't done in Nebraska the last 2 years. They're going to try to return kicks and punts. That was something that Eckler's teams at Tennessee did with a lot of success during his time there, and just a little bit more aggression, I think, which is probably warranted from that portion of the game for Nebraska. They also looked at, that they were going to be bringing in a new punter. Long snapping was an issue last year. They went in the portal and got a long snapper. They just added another kicker out of the portal, so you've got a three-way competition for the kicking spot too. So that's just an area that has to be addressed, because when you look at the way that Nebraska's lost games over the last decade, I mean, if you're just even to the other team in special teams, I mean, last year looked significantly different than the way it played out. So that was, in addition to getting everything right with offense and stuff like that, special teams was a huge point of emphasis for Nebraska this offseason.
Like, really, really enjoyed this, man. I feel like I learned a bunch about Nebraska. You guys run an awesome site at Husker 247. All your Nebraska fans need to make sure to go over and visit, and we'll see you soon, buddy.